Hey Dev Team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. What we're doing today is going to get our app progressed a little bit further. At the moment, when we click on any of our quizzes, we end up with the first quiz. And that's because within our code, we are just loading into the quiz page the first quiz, regardless of what we've clicked on. So that's the next thing I want to improve and get that sorted. So to do that, we're going to start by sorting out how our data works. At the moment, we've got this quiz model, and in this quiz model, we have hard-coded our quiz data, and that's fine for now. We'll worry about where the quiz data is actually going to come from in the future, but we are going to start work towards that. And so I'm going to create a repository. So I'm going to create a new folder called repositories. And in there, I'm going to create a new file called quiz repository .dart. And that's where our quiz repository is going to go. Okay, so what is our quiz repository going to do? Well, it's going to do a couple of things for us at the moment. The first thing is we want to have a method to get a list of all the quizzes. We're going to need that on the home page so we can display the list of the quizzes. And then we're also going to need to get an individual quiz. And I think for now that will do. So let's put this in. A list of all quizzes is going to be a list of quiz. And a list of quiz we'll call get all quizzes. Yeah, why not? Okay. And we need to import quiz here from our models. .dart, and for now we're simply going to return the quiz data because that is a list of quizzes. That's obviously going to need to be improved at some point when we get rid of our quiz data, but for now that's fine. And then we're going to need a quiz. We're going to return a single quiz, get quiz by ID. And let's pass in here a string, which is the ID of the quiz. And then we're going to return quiz data first, where the element is going to be a quiz. And the quiz ID equals the ID we have passed in. Now, as I write that, I've just realized the problem we're going to have, and that's in our quiz model. We've got Gen 1 for this quiz, and I haven't updated those for the other quizzes, so I'm just going to do that now. I'm going to have an ID of Gen 2 for that quiz, and an ID of Gen 3 for this quiz. The IDs need to be unique. Okay, so that takes care of that, and that means this will work. Now we're going to want to access this repository from a number of places within our app, and so if we come down to our material app, and this is where we're going to start making use of Bloc. So we've got a couple of extensions we want to install, and I'll talk about those as we go along. But if you've followed along and you installed the extensions that we talked about, we need to go to pubspec assist add update dependencies. So I got there by holding Control-Shift-P, and then if you can't see it in your list, you just need to start typing it, pubspec, and the recently used ones stay at the top. So add dependencies. What are the dependencies we want? Well, I want block, Flutter, spell block right, Flutter block, and equatable. And if I hit enter, Dart will, VS Code will go away and get those for me. And if you want to do that by hand because you haven't got the extension, in your pubspec.yaml you just need to add Flutter block, equatable, and block. So that's all what the extension's done for me, is it's put that in automatically and got the packages. Okay, now we've got that package. I'm coming to my material app, clicking Control Dot, and going to the very bottom here. It says wrap with repository provider, and again that's from one of the extensions that we installed in VS Code. That just puts this bit of text in for us, this bit of code even, not text. Again, if you haven't got that, you can type this by hand, but we have got the extensions installed. And a Control Dot on that to import the package flutter_block. And the repository, the subject repository that I want to make available is our quiz repository. So I'm just going to put that in there. So what does this do? Well, this allows us then to access through the context within our code the quiz repository from anywhere. It means there's only going to be one version of the quiz repository loaded, which means if we store stuff in there, if we do other things, it's not going to, code's not going to run twice. There's no weirdness happening. This is part of the Bloc library, but is a useful thing. You could do this without the Bloc library. There are ways of doing it, but we're using the Bloc library, so here we go. And we'll see how that works in a second. So I'm going to save that now, and I'm going to hard restart my app like that, and hopefully that has worked for us. So let's come to our quiz list page, which we have called home page. And in fact, it's still here. Yeah, it's still here. We need to get rid of this. We need to extract this widget, and I'm going to call this home page. So from the scaffold, let's just take that out and put that in a page by itself. And like we've made a subfolder here called quiz, I'm going to make a new folder called home, and in there a file called homepage.dart, and let's take that out and put it into our new homepage.dart. Need to import material, and we've got a few errors there, but I'm not worried about that. We're going to change that around in a second. I am also going to come up to our pages directory and create a new file called pages.dart, and this is going to be our barrel file for pages. So we're going to export our home page and export our quiz page. Okay, those are the only two pages we've got at the moment. So from our home page, we can come to the red squiggly underline for quiz page, and we want to import library pages. Go with that one. The quiz data length we'll deal with in a second. For now, let's think about this. For now, I'm going to just put a number there, doesn't matter, and change this text to, let's just change it to a string. Just trying to get rid of the errors. Okay, just so that everything compiles. I'm not worried about that at the second. So coming back to our home page, let's get rid of these two blue squigglies at the top, and where it says home page, again we're going to import our barrel pages file. We've got that done. Okay, that's everything working again. So let's come back to our home page now, where we do need a list of all the quizzes. So list of quiz, which we'll call quizzes, equals, and this is where the repository comes in now. We can say context read quiz repository, and then we need to import this read from Flutter Bloc, and then we can call the method getAllQuizzes. So this will return a list of all the quizzes for now, which is fine. So our item count becomes quizzes.length, and our text, instead of quiz data, is quizzes index name, and save of that, and that brings us back to where we were. So now we need to pass that information onto our quiz page. So let's come to our quiz page, and we want to pass into this quiz page the quiz ID that we're trying to access. So let's put a final string quiz ID. That needs to be required because we can't get any information about the quiz without a quiz ID. Okay, so that's fine. Come back to our home page. Now it's saying that we require a quiz ID. When we build that page, well, we can do that simply by putting the quizzes at the current index .id. So when we load the quizzes page, we're passing in the quiz ID of the current quiz in the list, which is coming from this item builder, and then the quizzes are coming from the repository. Now the way this works, context read, is basically Flutter starts looking up the context tree until it finds somewhere that provides a quiz repository, and our quiz repository is being provided right at the top of our app, so it's available throughout our app. Okay, let's save that. And now when we click on one of these, we have a quiz loaded, and we have the ID passed along with it. Wrong page, quiz page. So instead of loading our quiz here like we're doing, we can actually now say the quiz equals, let's find the quiz. So context.read, read what? Well, we want to find the quiz repository, and we want to we need to import Flutter Bloc here so we get our autocomplete. We want to get the quiz by ID, and we're going to pass in the quiz ID to get that, and that should return a quiz for us. So in theory, if we come to 2, we now get general knowledge 2, and if we come to 3, we get general knowledge 3. Questions are the same because we've not changed our quizzes up, but we now know we're getting the right quiz on the right page. Okay, that's great and all, but we need to make this a bit smarter, and so this is where we're going to start using our first block. Now I don't intend to talk in detail about blocks and other things called qubits, which are all part of the Bloc package. I think it's probably easier to learn from example if you're not familiar with it, but just understand that it separates the business logic, which is what Bloc stands for, the LOC being logic and the B being business, from the presentation layer, which is the page, is the visual lookout. So to create a block, and we're going to do this for our quiz page, if we come to our quiz page folder, right click and go to block, new block, which again is available because of the extension. Again, you don't need to do this. You could write all the code we're about to see by hand. That's entirely up to you, but this is much easier. So it says give a name for the block, and I'm just going to call this the quiz page block. That creates a block folder within our quiz page with 3 files, which are the state, an event, and the block. And we'll deal with all these in turn. Let's start with the state. This is essentially the state of the page, or whatever the block is. So a block doesn't necessarily have to relate to a page. It could relate to a whole subsection of your app, or it could relate to the whole app in full. But this means we don't have to use stateful widgets everywhere to maintain a state. Now there's a few different ways of managing a state with Bloc, and we'll do different methods in different parts of the app just to make it look interesting. But essentially we have a quiz state. This is the state of our quiz page. And in this particular case, I'm going to get rid of the abstract on here. Now this is where the equatable package comes in, because by default, not by default, Bloc works by checking objects. We have state objects, and it compares them to see whether the state has changed and to decide whether widgets need to get updated and redrawn and things like that. Now comparing objects, especially objects with mock children, is very difficult. It can be done, but you have to override a lot of code and write quite a lot of code, whereas the equatable package just takes care of it for us. And the way it works is if we created a property on this state called, let's say we had a string, which we're going to delete this in a second, string called name. We basically, the equatable package has this override of props, and we put name into there, and that tells the equatable package that this is one of the things that needs to get compared to see whether this object matches another object of the same type. Okay, we don't need name, that's an example. So what sort of thing do we need? Well, let's have a think about our whole quiz. We arrive at our quiz page and we start with a sort of introductory welcome screen. We then push a button to start the quiz. We then go through the questions, so we need to know which question we're on. And then we come to the end of the quiz and we end up on a finish page. So one of the things we need to know is the actual status of the page. So I'm going to do that by creating an enum, which I'm going to call quiz status, and I'm going to put lowercase e on enum. I don't know why I keep doing that. And so we have a few statuses. We're going to have a status called initial, which is the status we're going to come in when we first arrive at a page. We're going to have a status maybe called ready once the quiz is loaded, because maybe the quiz needs to be loaded from a database or somewhere in the future. We need to know if the quiz is started, and need to know if the quiz is finished. Okay, those are the statuses we need. So that's one of the properties we need to keep track of. So we're going to keep track of quiz status, and we'll call it status. Okay. What else do we need? Well, we need to know the quiz that we're doing. Let's keep track of that. So I'll have a final string call quiz ID. We'll keep track of that. And for now, we probably just need to know what question we're on. So final int question number. Yeah, that'll do for now. So let's create our, let's just delete that. This is the quickest way of doing it. Just generate our constructor for that. So we have our bits, and this is the constructor. Now I'm not going to make them required. Actually, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to set initial values for everything. So if we don't pass a value, I think the quiz status is going to be initial. The quiz ID, we'll just have that as blank. And the question number, well, it's always going to be the first question in the quiz, so the 0th index. And those are all things we want to keep track of. So let's put them in. Status, quiz ID, question number. Okay. And we can get rid of this class down here. This is a different way of maintaining state, and we'll look at that in a different block in a different section. Okay, this is complaining about something. What it's complaining about is I haven't put final here. Okay, and this needs to be const. Right, so we have that. That'll do for the state for now. The other thing I'm going to do, and this isn't necessarily part of quiz state, sorry, this isn't necessarily part of block, but what I want to do is just create an extension for this, just to make the code look a bit neater later on. I'm going to create an extension to the quiz status. Which basically gives us a couple of bools returned. And so they're going to be is initial, and that's going to return this equals quiz status initial. Now, if you aren't familiar with extensions, basically what it does is it takes whatever it is you're doing. So at the moment we've picked an enum, but it could be a string, it could be any of the types that we've got. And what that will do is in our code, it will allow us to say things like quiz status dot is initial, or more likely the status. We can call the status somewhere else and say status dot is initial. And that will return a true or a false if that status, which would be this, equals the initial status. I will show you that when we get to it. I will show you the difference. Oh, I'm going to put one of these in for each of the enums we got, each of the things. So is started and is finished. And just make sure that this is, it's meant to be ready, not red. Get our capitalization right. Is started and is finished. Okay, I think that's our state done for now. Let's come to our event page. And on our event page, we need to think about all the events that are likely to happen. What is an event? Well, it's an action. It's something that has happened. So either something that's happening by default, such as the page is beginning to load, or an action that a user has taken, maybe clicked a button or slid a slider, whatever the action might be. So the events we're going to have are a load page event. So we're going to create a class called load page, which is going to be the name of our event, and it has to extend the quiz page event we've got at the top, because it has to be, the types have to be the same. Okay, we're going to have a start quiz event, because if you remember, we're going to have a page which says which has the quiz information with a start button. So start quiz. Just copy that. We're going to have a answer question event, and the user answers one of the questions, and we're going to have, let's have a think, I'm going to have a next question event. Okay, what's the difference between next question and answer question? In my head, what I'm seeing is when a user clicks the answer to the question, it doesn't automatically take them on to the next page. It'll tell them if they've got their answer right or wrong, that sort of thing, and allow them to review their answer, and then they click a button to go on to the next page. That's what I'm thinking, but that's just a choice that I'm making here. Okay, so let's think about this now. When we load a quiz, what are we going to need? Well, we're going to need the quiz ID. So we know that's a string. We're going to call that quiz ID. That is going to be, need to generate a constructor for that. That is going to be a const constructor. And we also need to override the props again here. We can do that just by typing in props and putting into the square brackets quiz ID. So the event, when we call this event, sorry, the load page event, we're going to have to pass it a quiz ID. Okay, let's just leave it at that for now. We'll come back to this page in a minute. Let's go back to our block page where we have an error here because we've taken out quiz initial. We renamed that to quiz page state. Okay, so within the constructor here, what we need to do is make a list of all the events and call, let's get rid of that function just to make this a bit clearer. So what we're saying is on a particular event, do something. So for each of our events, let's start at the top. So the first one is our load page event. So on load page event, what do we want to do? Well, let's extract this and create another method on load page and control dot and create method on load page. That will create all the code we need for that here. So we could put this in there, but we've just extracted it. So what do we want to do when the page is loaded? Well, I think what we want to do is we want to change the state. Now, to change the state, we need to copy it, because you can't, these are all immutable, you can't do it. You can't just make a change. But with a control dot, we do have here a generate copy with. And if we click that, it'll generate the copy with code for us. Again, you could type it all in by hand, but let's make this easier for ourselves. So back at our quiz block, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new state, and we're going to emit that state. And when we emit a state, anything that's watching that state for changes will update. Any widgets we've got which are watching this state will change. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, we want to take the current state, which is our initial state, and we want to copy that with, two things. We want to change the status to quiz status ready, because now our quiz is ready. And we also want to store the quiz ID because that's been passed into us. And where's that coming from? Well, it's coming from the event quiz ID. Let's put those on multiple lines like that. So let's just be clear. On our quiz event, we have set up an event called load page, and when this event is fired, it requires the quiz ID. We're forcing that quiz ID to come in. And so the state that we've got, which initially has a blank string for the quiz ID, is updated, and it's updated with, well, it's copied and then restored, the updated status and the quiz ID. Let's save that. So how do we make use of that? Well, let's come back to our quiz page. And in the quiz page, we're now going to provide this block that we've just created to this page and everything below it. So I'm coming to the scaffold, and I'm going to wrap that with a block provider. So again, I selected the word scaffold, Control Dot, and wrap with block provider. What block do we want to provide? Well, we want to provide the quiz page block. Which I have inadvertently called with a lower p. So I'm just going to click on that, hit F2, and change that P to a capital in a couple of places just to make sure that is right. So I'm going to have to change that in the quiz page, the event page. Let's do F2 and the state page. That was a typo. I mean, we could have left it as lowercase, but it's camel case is easier to read and better. Right, I'm just saving all those, and now we can import the quiz page block. So we've got a block provider that creates this quiz page block and passes it to everything that we need. Okay. So now we don't need to necessarily pass the quiz name. We don't need the quiz name here. We could get it there, but we don't need to, because all the apps underneath are going to have access to the context. So for the title, for example, we put something just temporarily there for now. We'll just put quiz name. And the quiz in progress, well, that's going to change. We're not going to pass the quiz in there any longer. In fact, we're not necessarily going to have quiz in progress. Let's take that out. Because what we're going to need to put in here is a block builder. And we need to specify the block builder like so. Okay, now the block builder needs to know what type it is. So this is going to be the quiz page block, and the state is going to be the quiz page state, quiz page block, quiz page state. Okay, so now within this builder we have access to this block, and we can say if state status, and this is where those extensions come in. So if it is ready, then we're going to do something. Now, if we didn't write the extension, let's just copy that line. If we didn't write that extension, we would have had to have written if state status equals quiz status dot ready. But by writing that extension, we're able to use this shorter method, which makes it all a little bit more readable, I think. Either works. If you haven't written the extension, you need this. If you have written the extension, you can use that. So if the status is ready, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to return the quiz intro page, because the quiz is ready to go, but we haven't started. Okay, or not the quiz. It's not a page. It's a widget. It's got a red squiggly line because it's expecting us to pass a quiz in, but we're going to fix that in a second. Else, if state status is started, we're going to return the quiz in progress page. Again, we don't need to pass in the quiz anymore. Else, if state status is finished, we're going to return the quiz finished page. Again, we don't need the quiz there either. Else, we need to return a sort of loading indicator. So I'm just going to return in the center of the screen child circular progress indicator, just to show that we're loading. Okay, that should work for us. We've got quiz intro, quiz progress, quiz finished. But now they've all got errors because we're expecting to pass in a quiz. But we're not going to do that anymore. So let's take out that. And we've got a quiz description that's needed. So where are we going to get the quiz from? Well, this time in our builder, we can get the quiz from context.read and quiz repository. And we need to import the block here. Get quiz by ID, and the ID is also going to come from our block. So context.read state quiz ID. Now this isn't going to stay here for long. This is going to change later on, but this is just a quick way of getting it in for now. Okay, so that's going to be a quiz. We need to import our quiz model. I've just deleted that. My bad. Okay, so that's the quiz intro page taken care of. And we can copy that because we're going to need that on another page. So let's go to our quiz in progress page now. And again, we're passing in a quiz, but we don't need that anymore. I'm just going to put it into here that we've copied and import the relevant imports. Again, this is going to change. This is all going to be refactored later. But we'll take out that quiz. And then on the quiz finish page, again, well, let's just take it out. We're not actually using it here at the moment, so we'll just take it out and not worry about putting anything else in. Okay. So now our quiz page has got rid of the errors. And let's restart our app and hit General Knowledge 2. And we get a circular process indicator. So why is that happening? Well, as you know, in our state, we've set our state up to be initial, and we're never changing that. And so the state isn't ready, it isn't started, it isn't finished, so we're returning the circular progress indicator. So when we get to this page here, we somehow need to call that event. And we can do that initially when we create the quiz block. We can add an event to it immediately, and it's called load page, and it requires a quiz ID. And we're already passing a quiz ID into here. So now when we save that and refresh and hit our General Knowledge 2, we get to our quiz and we have a start button. Okay, so we've got the quiz description. So let's go to our quiz intro page. So we've got, this is the quiz description, yeah. And now the start button needs to start the quiz. So that is our next event. And we have an event for it, but we don't actually do anything with that event at the moment. So let's come back to our quiz block and create an event handler for that. So on start quiz, and we'll create a method here called on start quiz. Control dot create method on start quiz. So what do we want to do here? Well, we're going to emit a new state again. So state copy with, and let's think about what we need to change. Well, we don't need to change the quiz ID. We do need to change the quiz status. So the status now is going to be quiz status started. We're also going to change the question number here to 0. That's already set initial, but it's sort of belt and braces, if you like, to make sure that if this is called again, we always start at number 0. Okay, let's save that. And now come back to our quiz intro page. And on the on pressed, let's go and put in context dot read. What are we reading? Quiz page block. We want to add a new event to that block, and the event is going to be start quiz. That doesn't require any other input. That's all that needs to happen. So now when we click start, oh, got an error here, missed a semicolon. That's the problem. Let's do a refresh. General Knowledge 1, start. There we are. There's our first question. And that should now work for all of them. Number 2, start. It happens to be the same question in all of them. And that is the beginning of getting our block working. We'll leave it there for this episode. We will continue working on this block in the next episode and get it so that we can answer our questions. If you've enjoyed, folks, do leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out, and we'll see you in the next episode. All right, take care, folks. Bye for now.